Hello and welcome to this very lovely Thursday on Crypt. Oh my God, these prices, this market. But guys, the industry keeps evolving and there are reasons to be bullish. Let's just dive right in. Boom. One thing to note here that continues in this story of OG Bitcoin's dumping is Arkham, a on-chain data feed coming out saying Owen Gundin has now sold all of his 1.3 billion Bitcoin. Owen Gundin, a Bitcoin OG whale who held BTC since 2011, since late October has sold 11,000 Bitcoin worth 1.3 billion. He just transferred $230 million of Bitcoin to Kraken, marking his final sale. So if this is one of the reasons that we've seen continued downside pressure, well, maybe this begins to alleviate. But this does come back to the Bitcoin IPO thesis stating that we are spreading out the holders, moving from the few mega whales over to the ETFs and to the institutional clients. Now, obviously, this sale is going to be a major dampener on the industry, but I mean, fingers crossed that this alleviates some of the pressure. Now, Hunter Horsley from Bitwise comes out and says, just presented to 30 CEOs of wealth and broker-dealer firms, several good questions, 0 questions about price. And I guess that makes sense. These people are taking the long-term approach. They're learning more about the digital asset industry. And in reality, if you're on Wall Street, if you're talking to traditional financiers, these conversations around tokenization, around Bitcoin as a store of value and accruing it on the long term are very healthy and very alive. So yeah, we're seeing this dip, but will it dip to the same degree that we've seen in the past? Hard to say. I mean, there's these ETF products. There's a lot more maturity around holding Bitcoin on your balance sheet for the long term. And of course, anyone who thinks beyond cycle to cycle can see things like Tesla, who added Bitcoin a few cycles ago and is up tremendously, along with El Salvador, Bhutan, etc., etc. Now, one take that we also cannot ignore is just this utter explosion of stablecoins and what they are doing for the United States. I say for, not to, because it is in support. And we have Bo Hines, who previously represented cryptocurrency and blockchain in the Trump admin. He now works for Tether, and he says Tether is the largest private buyer of U.S. Treasuries, and within a year expects to be a top 10 buyer. Ram from Lumita Well says, so much for the BRICS and the end of dollar dominance. Hard to underestimate how this will accelerate emerging market dollarization. And this is something that I've spoken to time and time again. Stablecoins are proliferating so strongly throughout the developing world as other currencies that are not the dollar continue to shit the bed. Stablecoins on blockchain give anyone in the globe access to the US dollar as a savings account. This is monumental, and this is wildly impactful for people like China, like Russia, that are trying to disturb the relationship with the petrodollar and that dollar hegemony across the world. So this is a trend that is only picking up steam. More stablecoins are being issued. More infrastructure is coming out to move stablecoins cheap, fast, all the time, and the competition is now really on. Again, we're in a post-genius world come January 2027. So all of this is to say the future is ahead of us. Now, Tushar Jain of Multicoin Capital, a very prominent venture capital fund and major Solana backer, he comes out and he says, it feels like a big four seller is in the market. We're seeing systemic selling during specific hours. These are the US hours. Honestly, we've been going up during the Asia hours and just crushing every time the US opens. Probably a consequence of the 1010 liquidations. Hard to imagine that this scale of force selling continues for much longer. And as I've been saying, and as Tom Lee has been saying, and a lot of people have looked, there was this crazy liquidation event on October 10th. It had contagion ripple throughout the industry. It stopped a lot of the liquidity and the arbitrage and just hamstrung a lot of people. This probably meant that some major players were liquidated and that they need to sell down in order to get themselves out of their sticky situation. We're not seeing any validation to this thesis, however, so this is all very much under the radar, and fingers crossed that given the reopening of the government and the reinjection of liquidity into the markets writ large, that we can see some flattening in this sell side pressure. Now, I want to move over to Laura Shin, the CEO and host of the Unchained podcast and an all-around crypto journalist. She came out with this response around Anthony Pompliano's DAT, his Bitcoin digital asset treasury, and they revealed that there were these insane pay packages built in, regardless of if he makes money or not, with the upside of it being about $400 million in compensation. So utterly insane. Is this pro Bitcoin? Probably not. But what's really fun to see, and the market tends to do this, is that activist hedge fund Glazer Capital just took a 7.7% stake in ProCap's SPAC, and they're coming for Pompliano's compensation package. So this could be a rebalancing where they're trying to take this inordinate sum of money that Anthony Pompliano is trying to pay himself, using their activist investor position, this large stake that they've taken, to remove that wealth capture from Pompliano himself, who, if anyone remembers, he's pumped Bitcoin for forever, and then in bear markets has pivoted towards mattresses, towards all sorts of things. I mean, man has just been sort of a consummate grifter. So this is a fun push and pull, and just a narrative that I think is worth paying attention to as we do try to limit the amount of scammers and grifters inside of the industry. And in the same vein, Unchained has this nice segment with takeaways from Mike Selig's CFTC hearing, which has to do a lot with predictions markets. We all know about Kalshi and Polymarket and all of these deals with the UFC, with the NHL, and all of this sports betting. But this new CFTC chair, Mike Selig, is coming in and basically laying the groundwork that, hey guys, we're going to have to rein in a lot of this unregulated betting. This is very akin to what crypto went through in its earlier years. We're obviously a little bit more advanced, and I think there is a greater product market fit with these prediction markets, but right now they're really unshackled and they're going after everything. And the takeaway from this meeting with the CFTC is to say, hey, look, we're probably going to see a lot more restrictions. There's a lot of casinos and gamblers involved and sports betting applications and products that have already been heavily regulated, and they're looking at these new prediction markets through an unsavory lens, saying, hey, if it applies to me, why not thee? And where should these things settle? And if it's going to be sports betting, if it's going to be gambling, those will probably settle in the courts on a state-to-state level. Whereas if it's going to be prediction markets around election outcomes, around the Fed, around broader market opportunities, well, that will probably have to play out on the federal level. This will likely settle through the courts, through tried and true due process, and maybe something coming out of Congress. But the whole takeaway is that, yes, they will be reined in. It will likely be slow, a multi-year process. So if you're Polymarket or Kalshi, you may as well push forward as fast as possible right now in order to try to gain dominance, as we saw Binance do, as we saw Tether do in the early years. And yes, it might be a bumpy ride, but remember, the throne is there to be captured now, and you can always pay fines later. So with that being said, the markets are taking an absolute beating. If you were leveraged, you may easily get wiped out right now, because we saw a little bit of a bullish response to the Nvidia earnings last night. And again, these market periods between the Asia hours and the US hours, I mean, they are just in a complete push and pull. So that being said, don't over lever, stay safe. Hopefully this was entertaining and interesting to you, and I'll keep you posted tomorrow.